She slept in a 10 by 15 storage unit off the Gulf. Freeway worked the overnight loading dock at a warehouse she could walk to, and woke her 2 children every morning at 5:40 so they could disappear before anyone saw them leave. He owned 1,200 storage facilities across 14 states, had not personally walked through one since his company crossed $500 million, and was being driven to a small facility in Houston on a Tuesday in September to inspect a property he was planning to sell. Unit 14B was on his list. He was not prepared for what was inside it. Shirley had been awake since 5:15, not because something woke her. Her body had stopped needing a reason months ago. It simply opened its eyes in the dark. At the same minute, every morning swung its legs off the air mattress and placed its feet on the concrete floor the way a body does when it has memorized a routine so deeply that the mind is no longer required to participate. The unit was 10 by 15 feet. No windows. No ventilation beyond the gap at the bottom of the roll-up metal door, which let in a thin line of outside air that smelled like asphalt and exhaust, and the particular stillness of 4 in the morning in an industrial corridor off the Gulf Freeway. The only light came from a small flashlight she kept beside the mattress. She clicked it on. The beam moved across the space the way it always did, touching the same surfaces in the same order. The 3 plastic bins along the left wall labeled in her handwriting with masking tape: Dante School, Amara School, Shirley Work. The air mattress, with its clean fitted sheet, pulled tight at the corners 2 pillows, one with a faded bear print that belonged to her daughter. The cooler in the far right corner blue, functioning as both refrigerator and pantry. Beside it, a box of saltine crackers. A jar of peanut butter. 2 bottles of water. The floor was concrete. She had mopped it already. She mopped it every morning before the children woke, using a rag and a diluted mixture of bleach and water that she kept in a spray bottle under the cooler. The bleach came from Dollar General. She bought it with coupons when it went on sale and diluted it to last 2 weeks. The smell was sharp and specific, and it clung to the concrete and to her hands and to the inside of her nostrils in a way that she had stopped noticing, but that anyone walking in would notice immediately. It was the smell of a space being kept clean by someone who could not afford to let it be otherwise. Not because of health codes or inspections, but because the distance between a place where children sleep and a place where children should not sleep was measured in exactly this kind of effort. The small, invisible kind. The kind nobody sees. She reached for the tin box beside the cooler. It was a cookie tin, the kind that comes at Christmas with butter cookies inside, and she had been using it since the first week. She opened it. Inside were bills folded once and some coins. She counted them the way she counted them every morning, slowly, with the kind of attention people give to things that are the difference between eating and not eating. $14. That was what remained after the $189 rent for the unit paid on the first of the month in cash at the front office to a man named Terrence, who wrote her a receipt by hand and never once asked why she visited her storage unit every single day. The money came from her shift at the warehouse on Pickford Road. She loaded pallets from 10 at night until 4 in the morning 6 nights a week. $11.25 an hour. She walked there and she walked back because the bus did not run at 10 and did not run at 4, and the distance was 1.3 miles each way, and she had learned the route in the dark the way you learn any route you walk alone at night. As a woman, you learn which stretches have streetlights. You learn which do not. She put the money back, closed the tin, placed it in the same spot beside the bleach bottle. At 5:40, she knelt beside the mattress and placed her hand on her son's shoulder, then her daughter's. She did not use words. She used touch, a specific pressure they had learned to recognize firm enough to wake them, gentle enough not to startle. They had practiced this. The first week Amara had cried when woken in the dark, and the sound had carried through the metal walls in a way that made Shirley's entire body go rigid with the understanding of how thin the barrier was between their secret and the world outside it. They did not cry anymore. They rose in the dark. They dressed in the dark. They moved through the small space with the efficiency of people who have learned that every minute before 6:15 mattered, because at 6:15, Terrence started his shift and Terrence could not see them leaving. That was the system. Wake at 5:15. Clean. Count. Wake the children at 5:40. Dressed and out by 6. Be invisible. Do it again tomorrow. The system worked because Shirley had designed it to work the way you design anything when failure means your children sleep outside. Dante was 10 years old, and he understood more than a 10-year-old should need to understand. He knew the rules. He knew them the way he knew his own name automatically, without needing to think, because thinking about them too long meant thinking about why they existed, and that was a door he had learned to keep shut. The first rule was that he did not tell anyone at school where he lived. When someone asked, and someone always asked eventually because children ask, he said the name of the street nearest to the storage facility, Breckenridge Lane. He had said it enough times that it came out of him with the specific ease of a thing rehearsed past the point of rehearsal into something that sounded like truth. He could describe a house on Breckenridge Lane because he had walked past one with a red door and a chain-link fence every morning, and he had studied it the way a person studies a role they have been cast in. The red door, the chain-link fence, a yard with a bicycle in it. These details were his script, and he delivered them without hesitation. The second rule was that he walked his sister to school, and he walked her back, and he did not let go of her hand at the crossings. There were 2 crossings between the facility and Jefferson Elementary. He knew them both. He had drawn them on a piece of paper folded into quarters that he kept in the front pocket of his backpack. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded, handled so many times that the creases had become grooves. On it he had drawn the route in pencil. A line from a point marked us to a point marked school. 0.4 miles. 7 minutes. 2 intersections. Left at the laundromat. Along the route he had drawn small dots with labels. Laundromat, which had chairs inside and stayed open early if it rained. ATM, which had a metal awning if they needed to wait. 7-Eleven, which had a bathroom they could use without buying anything if Amara needed to go. This was a map drawn by a 10-year-old, and it was not a school project. It was a survival system. He folded it each morning and placed it in his bag with the specific care of a person putting away something important. Amara was 6. She did not understand the rules the way Dante did. She understood them the way 6-year-olds understand things, which is partially and with a willingness to accept the parts she did not understand as simply the way things were. She called the storage unit the room. Not home. Not the storage. The room. The way children name things they do not have words for by reducing them to the simplest available term and then moving on. Because children do not dwell on language the way adults do. They use what works and they keep going. She had a stuffed rabbit she slept with that she had named Tuesday for reasons she had never explained and that Shirley had never asked about because some things children name do not need reasons. Tuesday went into her backpack every morning and came out every evening, and this was the one part of the routine that belonged entirely to Amara and was not governed by the rules. Shirley took them outside through the side corridor of the facility, the one that ran along the back fence where the security camera had been broken for months. They sat on the concrete step beside the chain-link fence. She gave them each a granola bar and a bottle of water. They ate, sitting on the step in the early light, and if you had driven past at that moment and looked through the fence, you would have seen a woman and 2 children sitting outside a building eating breakfast. And you would have assumed she was a mother who had brought her children to school early and was waiting for the doors to open. You would not have seen the storage unit. That was by design. Children do not experience poverty the way adults do. They experience the geometry of it, how far the walk is, which doors open, which ones do not, which buildings have bathrooms, which sidewalks have shade. Dante had learned the geometry of his life the way other children learn multiplication tables, through repetition and necessity and the quiet understanding that getting it wrong had consequences. He was not old enough to fully name, but was old enough to feel. He finished his granola bar. He put the wrapper in his pocket because there was a trash can at the school entrance, and his mother had taught him not to leave evidence. He took Amara's hand. They started walking. Shirley watched them go. She watched until they turned left at the laundromat and disappeared. She stood on the step for another 30 seconds after they were gone, the way she always did. Not because she could see them anymore, but because standing there for 30 extra seconds was the last thing she could do for them before the day took over, and the next 14 hours became about the work of making tomorrow possible. Then she went back inside. She pulled the metal door down. She sat on the mattress in the dark. She had 4 hours before her shift at the warehouse started again, and she needed to sleep, and the unit was quiet, and the bleach smell was familiar, and the tin box was where it always was, and the system was holding. The system was holding. That was what she told herself each morning after the children left. Not that things were good, not that things were getting better, just that the system was holding. And for now, that was enough. That particular Tuesday in September, Xavier Drummond was in the back seat of a black Escalade being driven south on Interstate 45 toward a part of Houston he had not visited in over 3 years. He sat with his legs, crossed, an iPad propped on his knee, scrolling through a quarterly performance report that his chief operating officer had sent the night before with a subject line that read, simply facility review underperforming. Assets action required. Facility number 47 was on page 11 of the report, a self-storage property on the industrial corridor near the Gulf Freeway, 62 units built in 2004, occupancy rate at 71%. Revenue per square foot was 14% below the company average. Maintenance costs had risen for the 3rd consecutive year. The property sat on land that had appreciated significantly since acquisition, which meant the math increasingly favored selling the land over operating the business on top of it. Xavier read these numbers the way he read all numbers, quickly, precisely, with the specific fluency of a man who had spent 30 years translating physical spaces into financial abstractions. A unit was not a room to him. It was square footage. Square footage was revenue potential. Revenue potential was either realized or unrealized, and unrealized potential was another word for loss. He looked up from the iPad and said to Raymond, his driver, a sentence he had said in various forms across hundreds of similar drives. Every unit that is not generating revenue is a unit that is costing me money. Raymond said nothing. He had worked for Xavier for 6 years. He was a man who understood the value of silence in the presence of someone who was thinking out loud and did not require a response. Xavier Drummond was 54 years old. He was the founder and chief executive of Drummond Storage Holdings, which operated 1,200 self-storage facilities across 14 states and was valued according to the most recent private estimate at approximately $1.2 billion. He had built the company from a single facility he purchased at 24 with borrowed money and a conviction that Americans would always need places to put things they could not fit in their lives, but could not bring themselves to discard. He had been right. The company had grown every year for 30 years. He was not a man who made a habit of visiting individual facilities. He had stopped doing that when the company passed $500 million in valuation, and the distance between his daily life and the operations on the ground became the kind of distance that is measured not in miles but in layers. Layers of vice presidents and regional managers and property supervisors and local staff, each layer adding another degree of separation between the man who owned the buildings and the buildings themselves. He was making an exception today for a reason he had been telling himself was practical. Facility 47 was a decision point. Sell, convert, or renovate. The numbers supported selling. His operations team supported selling. The only reason he was driving there in person was that he had a policy established early that he would walk any property before authorizing its disposal. It was a principle, not a sentiment. He walked properties the way a surgeon reviews scans before operating. Not out of emotion, out of discipline. The city moved past the windows of the Escalade. The glass towers of downtown gave way to the medical center, then further south into the industrial stretches, where the buildings got lower, and the lots got wider, and the landscaping disappeared. Strip malls, tire shops, pawn stores with barred windows, a church with a hand-painted sign, a woman pushing a stroller along a sidewalk that had no shade. Xavier did not look at these things. He was looking at the iPad. He was looking at the numbers for Facility 47 and calculating the net gain of a sale versus the projected cost of renovation and the opportunity cost of capital tied up in a property that was underperforming its peer group by Asgate. A margin he found personally irritating. Inside the Escalade, the air was cool and quiet and smelled like leather. Outside Houston in September was doing what Houston in September does, which is to be hot in a way that feels personal, as if the heat has opinions about you specifically. The temperature at 8 in the morning was already 89 degrees. The air was wet. The sky was white. Raymond turned off the freeway. The road narrowed. They passed a gas station and a fenced lot full of shipping containers and a stretch of chain link with brown weeds growing through it. Then the storage facility appeared on the left, a low concrete building with a flat roof and a metal sign that read, "Drummond Storage Unit Rentals, available climate-controlled units on site." Xavier looked at it through the window. 62 units generating 14% below average revenue on land that was worth more empty than occupied. That was what he saw, a line on a spreadsheet, a problem to be resolved. Raymond put the car in park. Xavier closed the iPad. He adjusted his jacket. He opened the door and stepped out into the heat, which hit him immediately, the kind of heat that makes fabric stick and patience thin, and everything slightly harder than it needs to be. He looked at the building. He did not know what was inside Unit 14B. He did not know that the same property he was calculating the sale value of was the place a woman had chosen out of 14 options because it was exactly 0.4 miles from the only school in the district that could teach her son to read. He did not know that the square footage he measured in revenue per unit was the square footage where 2 children slept on an air mattress and woke in the dark and ate granola bars on a concrete step and walked to school holding hands. He knew none of this. He was about to. Terrence was waiting by the front office when the Escalade pulled into the lot. He had seen the car from the window, the kind of vehicle that did not belong in this part of Houston, and he had known before it stopped who was inside it because he had received the email 3 days ago. Corporate inspection. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Facility 47. He had cleaned the office, organized the files, replaced the burnt-out light in the hallway near the restroom. He had done everything on the checklist. Almost everything. He came out into the heat and stood by the entrance with his hands at his sides. He was 58 years old. He had worked at this facility for 11 years, which was longer than most of the tenants had been alive and longer than any regional manager had lasted. He knew the property the way you know a place when it is the place where your days happen. Every gate code, every unit number, every padlock that stuck in the humidity, every corner where the roof leaked when the storms came through in June. He knew which tenants paid on time and which ones needed reminding and which ones had stopped coming altogether and which ones came every single day. He knew about Unit 14B. He had known for 7 months. He had made a decision about it in the first week, and he had not revisited that decision, and he was not going to revisit it now, not even with the man who owned 1,200 of these buildings standing in front of him in a suit that cost more than Terrence made in a month. Xavier stepped out of the car. The heat hit him. Terrence watched the way he reacted to it, the slight adjustment of the shoulders, the way his hand moved to loosen his collar. It was the body language of a person who spent most of his time in climate-controlled rooms and had temporarily forgotten what the rest of the world felt like. They shook hands. Xavier's grip was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who had somewhere to be and viewed this stop as a task on a list. They walked the property. Xavier asked questions as they moved through the rows. Occupancy rate. Terrence said 71%. Delinquent accounts. Terrence said 4, all under 60 days. Security system. Terrence said the cameras on the east side needed replacing, had needed replacing for 2 years, and that he had submitted the request 3 times. Xavier nodded. He was looking at the buildings, the way you look at something you are deciding whether to keep with the detached evaluation of a person measuring cost against return. He did not look at the units themselves. He looked at the roofline, the drainage, the condition of the asphalt, the fencing, the infrastructure, the shell, not what was inside. They reached row B. Xavier pulled up the tenant list on his phone. He scrolled through it. His eyes passed over a line. Unit 14B. Shirley Watts, status current. Monthly rate, $189. Last payment, September 1st. He did not stop on it. He did not slow down. The name was a data point, one of 62 occupying the same weight as every other name on the screen. There is a specific kind of blindness that comes with looking at the world through spreadsheets. The numbers are accurate. They tell you the occupancy rate and the revenue per square foot and the maintenance cost per unit and the tax assessment and the projected sale value. They tell you everything except the one thing that matters, which is what is actually happening inside the spaces you own. The numbers for Unit 14B said current. The numbers did not say that a woman was raising 2 children behind a roll-up metal door. The numbers did not know that. The numbers did not know anything. Xavier closed the screen. He looked down row B. 6 units on each side, metal doors, concrete walkways, heat shimmering off the flat roof. Nothing unusual. He said to Terrence, "Let us start at this end and work through." Terrence said, "Yes, sir." His voice did not change. His hands at his sides did not move. But something behind his eyes shifted in a way that Xavier did not notice and that Terrence did not intend for him to notice. They started walking. The first thing Xavier noticed was the ground. It was not something he would have seen if he had not been looking down at the walkway to check for cracks in the concrete, which was part of the inspection, which was part of the reason he was here. But he was looking down, and what he saw in front of Unit 14B was different from what he had seen in front of every other unit in the row. The concrete was clean, not just clear of debris. Clean, swept, the kind of clean that does not happen on its own in an industrial corridor in Houston where dust settles on every surface within hours of being removed. Someone had swept this section. Recently. Regularly. He stopped. He looked at the ground. Then he looked at the unit door. The door was down, locked, same as every other unit, but the lock was different. Every other unit on this row used the facility-issued padlock, a standard brass model with the Drummond logo stamped on the face. Unit 14B had a combination lock, silver, not from the facility. Xavier looked at Terrence. "This tenant is using her own lock." Terrence nodded. "She bought her own," said the facility one was too easy to pick. "She was worried about security." Xavier said she. Terrence paused. A pause so brief it barely registered, but it was there. The tenant. Xavier looked at the ground again. Now that he was looking, he saw something else. Marks on the concrete. Not scuff marks from furniture being dragged in and out, the kind you see at storage facilities everywhere. These were different. Narrow, parallel, consistent. Wheel marks from something small, a cart or a wagon, running along the same track repeatedly from the direction of the main gate to Unit 14B. Someone had been moving things into and out of this unit regularly. Not once a month or once a season the way most tenants access their storage. Regularly. The way you move things when you are using a space every day. He said, "How often does this tenant access the unit?" Terrence looked at him. Then he looked at the ground. Then he looked back. "She is here most days, sir. Most days. For a storage unit." Terrence did not respond. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that contains information, the kind a person creates when the truth is something they have decided not to volunteer but will not lie about if directly asked. Xavier studied him. He was beginning to understand that Terrence knew something he was not saying, though he did not yet understand what it was or why it mattered. He turned back to the unit door. "I want to see inside," Terrence said. "Policy requires we notify the tenant before inspection. I can call her." "Call her." Terrence took out his phone. He dialed. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He lowered the phone. "No answer, sir?" Xavier said, "I own this facility. The lease agreement provides for inspection with 24-hour notice or in the presence of management in cases of suspected violation. You are management. Open it." Terrence stood still for a moment. Then he reached for the combination lock. He knew the combination. He had known it for 7 months. because she had given it to him in the second week in case of emergency, and he had written it on a piece of paper he kept in his desk drawer and had never used. Before he turned the dial, Xavier looked down one more time. At the base of the roll-up door, along the rubber seal where the metal met the concrete, there was a faint residue, white, dried. He crouched slightly and touched it with his finger. Soap. Someone had scrubbed the outside of this door, not the inside, the outside, the part the world could see. He stood up. Terence turned the lock. The mechanism clicked. He reached down and pulled the door upward. The metal rolled and rattled in its track, and the interior of Unit 14B was exposed to the September light for the first time that day. The first thing was the smell. Xavier had been in hundreds of storage units over the course of his career. They smelled like dust and cardboard and the particular mustiness of enclosed air that has not moved in weeks. This unit did not smell like that. It smelled like bleach. Clean, sharp, unmistakable. The smell of a surface that had been wiped down that morning. He stood in the doorway. He did not step inside. Something in the arrangement of the space stopped him at the threshold the way a person stops at the door of a room they were not expecting to find. It was 10 by 15 feet, the same dimensions as every other unit in the row. But this was not a storage unit. This was a place where someone lived. Along the left wall, an air mattress had been folded and pushed upright to make room. A fitted sheet was still wrapped around it, white clean. 2 pillows leaned against it. One was plain, the other was small and had a faded bear printed on the fabric, the kind of pillow that belongs to a young child and goes wherever the child goes. He stared at the pillow. 3 plastic bins were stacked along the wall behind the mattress. Each one had a strip of masking tape across the front with a label written in neat handwriting. He moved close enough to read them. The first said Dante School. The second said Amara School. The third said Shirley Work. 3 bins, 3 labels. A family's wardrobe organized with the precision of someone who could not afford clutter, because clutter takes space, and space was the one thing there was not enough of. In the far right corner sat a blue cooler, with the lid closed. Beside it, a box of saltine crackers, a jar of peanut butter with the lid screwed on tight, and 2 bottles of water. Next to the water, a small tin box, the kind that comes with butter cookies at Christmas. It was closed. Beside it, a spray bottle of diluted bleach. On the wall above the cooler, 2 adhesive LED strips had been pressed to the concrete, the cheap kind sold at dollar stores powered by batteries. Beneath the lights, arranged on the floor against the wall, were 2 children's workbooks, a handful of pencils in a rubber band, and a library book. He could read the spine, Charlotte's Web. He stood there, looking at the library book for a long time. Not because the book itself was significant, but because of what it meant. Someone had taken a child to a library. Someone living in a storage unit had walked to a public library and checked out a book and brought it back here and read it under adhesive lights powered by batteries in a space with no windows. That specific combination of deprivation and determination hit him in a place he did not have a name for. Then he saw the piece of paper. It was on the floor beside the mattress, folded into quarters, soft at the creases from being handled many times. He bent down and picked it up. He unfolded it. It was a map, drawn in pencil by a hand that was not yet steady. A child's hand. A line ran from one point to another. The starting point was labeled in small, uneven letters. Us. The ending point was labeled School. Along the route were small dots, each with a word beside it. Laundry, ATM, 7-Eleven. At the top, in slightly larger writing, a number, 7 Min. Xavier held the map. He looked at the line from us to school. He looked at the dots. He looked at the word us, written by a child who did not write home or house or apartment but us, because the place was not defined by what it was defined by who was in it. He turned around. Terence was standing in the doorway. He had not come inside. He stood with his hands at his sides and his face showing nothing and everything at the same time, in the way of a man who has been carrying a secret and has just watched someone else discover it. Xavier said, "How long?" Terence said, 7 months, sir?" Xavier looked at him. Terence looked back. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The heat pressed in from outside. Somewhere on the freeway, a truck shifted gears. The world continued. 7 months. A woman and 2 children had been living in his storage unit for 7 months, and the man who owned 1,200 of them had not known. He heard her before he saw her. Footsteps on concrete, light and quick and deliberate, the specific rhythm of someone who knew exactly how many steps it took from the gate to this door and had walked them so many times the route had become automatic. The footsteps came down the corridor of row B and stopped. She was standing at the entrance of the unit, a plastic bag in her right hand, the kind from a grocery store, holding what looked like a loaf of bread and a carton of something. She was wearing a reflective vest over a dark, long-sleeved shirt, cargo pants, and steel-toed work boots that were scuffed at the toe and caked with dust along the sole. Her hair was pulled back. She was small and thin in the way of a person who has been thin for a long time, not from choice, but from the specific arithmetic of calories that do not quite add up. She saw Xavier first. Then she saw Terrence. Then she saw the open door of the unit behind them. She did not move. There is a specific expression on the face of a person who has been surviving alone for a long time and has just been found. It is not relief. It is not shame. It is not the collapse you might expect. It is the rapid calculation of how much damage this discovery will cause and how quickly she needs to move to contain it. It is the face of someone who has rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times and is now running through the rehearsed responses to find the one that fits. Shirley's eyes moved from Xavier to the interior of the unit and back to Xavier. She was reading him. She was reading his suit and his shoes and his posture and the way he stood relative to her space, and she was making decisions based on information she was gathering in real time. Her hand tightened on the plastic bag. Not in fear, in preparation. The silence lasted longer than it should have. Then she spoke. "I will be out by Friday." She said it flat. No emotion in it, no apology, no explanation. Just the sentence she had been carrying in her chest for 7 months in case this exact moment arrived. She delivered it the way you deliver something you have practiced cleanly and without hesitation, because hesitation invites questions, and questions lead to answers she could not afford to give. Xavier looked at her. He looked at the bag in her hand. He looked at the unit behind him, at the plastic bins, and the cooler and the library book and the map he had been holding 5 minutes ago and had set back down on the floor beside the mattress. He said, "Where are the children now?" Shirley's body shifted. Not a step back. Something smaller. A tightening of the shoulders, a slight lift of the chin. The body language of a person who has just heard the one question she was not prepared for and is recalculating. "They are at school." Her voice was harder now, shorter. She was closing a door with her tone, telling him without words that the children were not part of this conversation. That he could have the unit and the lease and the violation and whatever legal consequence was coming, but the children were hers, and she was not giving him anything about them that she did not have to. Xavier understood this. He understood it not because he was perceptive in this particular moment, but because it was impossible to misunderstand. She was a woman standing in a corridor in a reflective vest holding a grocery bag, and she was more fortified than any building he owned. The fortification was in her eyes, in the way she held the bag, in the way she said "they are at school" and nothing more. He was aware that the next thing he said mattered. He was aware that she was measuring him the way you measure a situation that could go in several directions, not all of them safe. He was aware that 30 seconds from now she would either believe he was someone worth talking to, or she would pick up whatever she could carry and be gone before the end of the day, and he would never see her again. He did something she did not expect. He stepped backward, out of the unit. He moved through the doorway and stood on the concrete walkway, 3 steps from the entrance under the narrow overhang where the roof extended past the wall. He was no longer inside her space. Shirley watched him do this. She did not say anything, but something in her face registered it. A small shift behind the eyes, the kind of recalibration a person makes when the thing they expected to happen does not happen and they need a moment to adjust. He stood outside. She stood at the threshold. Terrence stood to the side saying nothing. His presence a quiet testimony to something he had decided 7 months ago and had not wavered from since. Xavier said, "How old are they?" She looked at him. She measured the question. Then she answered, 10 and 6. They go to school nearby Jefferson Elementary. It is 4 blocks from here. The words sat between them. Xavier was quiet. Then he asked a question that had been forming since he saw the map on the floor. "Is that why you chose this unit?" Shirley did not answer immediately. She looked at him for a long time, the way you look at a person when you are deciding how much of the truth they can be trusted with. She had spent 7 months protecting a secret by telling no one. She had spent 7 months answering questions from no one. And now a man in a suit who owned the walls she slept inside was asking her a question that went to the center of everything. And she had to decide in this moment whether to give him the smallest edge of the truth or nothing at all. She said, "It is the closest storage facility to their school that I could afford." Xavier stood still. The sentence entered him, and he heard it, and he understood the words individually, but the full weight of what they meant, the arithmetic behind them, the specific calculus of a mother choosing a metal box based on its proximity to a school, that had not fully landed yet. It would land later. It would land completely. But in this moment, it sat just beneath the surface of his comprehension, pressing upward. Terrence spoke for the first time since the unit was opened. He said it quietly, looking not at Xavier, but at a point somewhere on the concrete between them. "She has never been late on rent. Not once in 7 months." Xavier looked at Terrence. Terrence looked back. In that look was a question that had no words but was perfectly clear. "Now what are you going to do?" Not an accusation, not a challenge, just the question of a man who had made his own decision 7 months ago and was now watching to see what kind of decision the man who owned the building would make. Xavier turned back to Shirley. She was still standing at the threshold, still holding the bag, still watching. He said, "I am not going to do anything today. I need you to not be afraid of that. I am going to leave and I am going to come back. And when I come back, I would like to understand." She said nothing. She watched him walk away. She watched him get into the back of the black Escalade. She watched the car pull out of the lot and turn onto the road and disappear. Then she went inside. She closed the door. She sat on the mattress, and she did not move for a very long time. Xavier came back the following morning. He came alone. No Raymond, no Escalade. He drove himself in a car Shirley had not seen before, a sedan plane, and he parked it in the lot and walked to the facility entrance, where Terrence let him in without a word. Shirley was sitting on the concrete step beside the chain-link fence at the back of the facility, the same step where she fed her children breakfast every morning. She had agreed to this meeting, though agreed was a generous word for what had actually happened. Terrence had called her. He had said the owner wanted to come back and talk. She had said nothing for a long time. Then she had said outside, not in the unit. That was her condition, not inside, outside, on the step, where she could see the gate and the road and the distance between herself and the nearest exit, where the space was open and the conversation could not be contained or controlled by walls that belonged to someone else. It was a boundary. She was drawing it in the only way she had available. By choosing the ground, Xavier sat down on the step, not next to her, a few feet away. The distance was not accidental on either side. She sat with her hands on her knees. He sat with his hands open. The morning was already warm, somewhere on the freeway traffic. Somewhere closer, a dog barking in a yard behind the fence. She told him, not everything, not all at once. She told him, in the voice of a person who has explained her situation to intake workers and case managers and shelter administrators, and has learned that the most effective way to tell it is without emotion, because emotion invites pity, and pity changes the way people hear you, and she needed him to hear the facts, not the feeling. She had lived in an apartment in Sunnyside, 2 bedrooms, $1,150 a month. She had worked at a medical supply warehouse. She had been married to a man named Rodney. Rodney had hit her. He had hit her for 3 years. She had left when Amara was 4 after the last time, which was the time that put her in the emergency room with a fractured wrist and a bruise along her jaw that took 3 weeks to fade. She got a restraining order. Rodney did not honor it. He found her first apartment, then her second, then her third. Each time she moved, she lost something. The first move cost her the security deposit she could not recover. The second cost her the job because she missed too many shifts during the transition. The third cost her the apartment itself, not because she stopped paying, but because the landlord heard the police had come twice in 1 month and decided the situation was more trouble than the rent was worth. Shirley's eviction was not unusual. In Houston alone, courts had processed over 75,000 eviction filings the previous year. The majority involved families with children. The majority involved women. The arithmetic of poverty in America is not complex. It is relentless. It does not require a single dramatic failure. It requires only a sequence of ordinary ones, each too small to be a catastrophe on its own, each large enough to remove one more option from the list until the list is empty. She had tried the shelters. The first one had a 90-day limit. She stayed 62 days. On the 62nd day, she was told her time was almost up and that she would need to find alternative housing. She had not found alternative housing because alternative housing required a deposit and first month's rent and a background check that would show 3 evictions and a domestic violence history. And landlords did not distinguish between the person who caused the violence and the person who fled from it. The paperwork looked the same. The second shelter did not have a time limit, but it had a policy. Children over the age of 8 slept in a separate dormitory from their mothers. Dante was 9. She arrived at the shelter on a Monday evening. She was shown the women's dormitory. She was told that Dante would sleep in the children's wing on the 2nd floor. She looked at the 2nd floor. She looked at the hallway. She looked at the lock on the dormitory door, which was a simple latch. She asked who supervised the children's wing at night. She was told a volunteer checked in every 2 hours. She left on the 2nd night. She took her children, and she left. She said to Xavier, sitting on that step in the same flat voice she had been using since she started, "I was not going to let them put my son in a different room from me at night in a building full of strangers." Xavier did not respond. He sat with the sentence. He did not nod or agree or express sympathy. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is too heavy to hold and too important to set down. There is a specific kind of decision that looks reckless from the outside and looks like the only sane option from the inside. Choosing a storage unit over a shelter that separates your children is that kind of decision. From a distance, it looks like failure. From inside it, it looks like the last act of a mother who has run out of options that do not require her to hand over the one thing she will not hand over: the proximity of her children at night, the knowledge of where they are, the ability to reach them if something goes wrong. These are not luxuries, they are the minimum. And when the minimum is not available through any system designed to help you, you find it somewhere else. That was how she found the storage unit. That was how she found Facility 47. Xavier asked the question the following morning. He had come back a 3rd time. He sat on the same step. She sat in the same spot. The distance between them had not changed. The morning was cooler than the one before, the kind of brief mercy Houston offers in September, when the wind shifts for an hour before the heat reasserts itself. He said, "Why this facility? There are cheaper ones further south." She looked at him. She had been waiting for this question. She could tell by the way he asked it that he was not asking casually. He had been thinking about it. He had gone home the day before, and he had thought about the map on the floor, and the combination lock on the door, and the labels on the plastic bins, and the library book, and the fact that this woman, out of every available option in a city of 2 million people, had chosen this specific 10 by 15-foot metal box. And he wanted to know why. She told him. She had looked at 14 storage facilities in the Houston area that fell within her budget. Between $150 and $200 a month, she had eliminated them one by one. 6 were too far from any school in the district. The first bus did not run until 7:15, and she finished her shift at 4 in the morning, which gave her just over an hour to walk back, wake the children, get them dressed and fed, and out of the unit before the facility opened. If the school was a bus ride away, the timing did not work. The margin was too thin. 3 were in areas she had assessed as unsafe for a woman walking alone after 10 at night, which was when her shift began. She walked to work. She could not afford to be on a route where the risk of being followed or confronted was higher than it already was. 2 had no public restroom within walking distance. This mattered because the unit did not have a bathroom. The children needed access to a toilet before school and after school, and sometimes in the middle of the night, and the nearest option needed to be close enough that a 10-year-old could walk there and back in under 5 minutes. That left 3 facilities. Of the 3 facility, 47 was the closest to Jefferson Elementary, 0.4 miles, 7 minutes on foot, 2 intersections. Jefferson Elementary was not a random school. It was the only public school in the affordable radius that offered a free after-school tutoring program for children with learning disabilities. Dante had a reading difficulty that had been identified in 2nd grade and never properly addressed because they had moved 3 times, and each move meant a new school, and each new school meant a new intake process, and each intake process meant starting over. By the time he arrived at Jefferson, he was in 5th grade reading at a 2nd grade level. The tutoring program at Jefferson met 3 afternoons a week. It was staffed by 2 certified reading specialists and a volunteer from the local university. It was funded through a Title I grant that covered the materials and the staff and the after-school snacks. It was free. In 7 months, Dante had gained 2 reading levels. He was now reading at a 4th grade level. He was not where he should be, but he was moving. He was moving because 3 afternoons a week, he sat in a classroom with a woman named Miss Waverly, who had the specific patience of a person who believed that every child could learn to read, and who was willing to sit with a boy for as long as it took until the letters stopped swimming. Shirley said this. She said it in the same flat voice she had used for everything else. She did not raise it for emphasis. She did not slow down for effect. She said, "I did not choose a storage unit. I chose the distance between my son and the only classroom in this city that was teaching him to read." Xavier sat on the step. He did not speak. The sentence went into him, and it stayed there. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the folded piece of paper he had picked up from the floor of the unit 2 days earlier and had been carrying with him since. The map. He unfolded it. He looked at the line from us to school. He looked at the dots along the route. Laundry, ATM, 7-Eleven. He looked at the number at the top, 7 Min. He understood now what every mark on that paper meant. Every dot was a decision. Every label was a calculation. A 10-year-old boy had drawn the operating system of his family's survival on a single sheet of paper and folded it into quarters and carried it in his backpack every day like a compass. Xavier Drummond had built an empire by understanding the value of square footage. He was beginning to understand that he had never known what square footage actually cost. Terrence took him to Unit 14A. It was next door. One wall of corrugated metal between Shirley's life and the woman who had known about it since the beginning. Mrs. Odessa Grant was 71 years old. She was small and upright in the way of people who have carried themselves with precision their entire lives, because precision was the one thing no one could take from them. She had white hair cut close, and hands that moved slowly and deliberately, and eyes that looked at Xavier the way eyes look at a person they are not yet sure about. She was sitting on a folding chair outside her unit when they arrived. The unit behind her was open. Inside, Xavier could see a narrow cot, a small table, a hot plate connected to an extension cord that ran along the base of the wall and out through the gap beneath the roll-up door to an exterior outlet in the corridor. The extension cord was not authorized. Terrence knew about it. He had known about it for 2 years. He had said nothing about it the same way he had said nothing about 14B. Mrs. Odessa looked at Xavier. She did not stand. She told him how she had found out about Shirley. It was in the first month. She had heard a child crying through the wall, not loud. The kind of crying a child does when they are trying not to cry and cannot quite manage it. She had pressed her ear to the metal and listened. She had heard a woman's voice, low, steady, saying words she could not make out, but whose tone she recognized. The tone of a mother calming a child in the dark. She had knocked on the wall. 2 knocks. There was silence. Then 2 knocks came back. That was how it started. 2 knocks on a shared wall between 2 women who were living in storage units for different reasons and who understood without discussion that what they shared was not a wall but a secret. Mrs. Odessa had let Shirley use her hot plate. She had watched Amara on nights when Shirley worked, and Dante had not yet come back from the after-school program. She had kept the secret without being asked to keep it, because some things do not require a conversation. They require only the recognition of what is at stake. Xavier asked her how she had ended up here. She told him in the brief way of a person who has no interest in pity and no patience for explaining things that should not need explaining. She had owned a house in 3rd Ward for 40 years. Her husband died in 2014. She was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. The treatment worked. The bills did not. In this country, the distance between owning a home and living in a storage unit is 1 diagnosis. She said this without bitterness. She said it the way you say a fact about the weather. It was simply what had happened. Xavier asked her why she had not reported Shirley, why she had not told Terence or called the company or done any of the things that a person in her position might reasonably have done. Mrs. Odessa looked at him. She looked at him for a long time with an expression that was not anger and was not judgment, but was something closer to the kind of patience a person develops after 7 decades of watching the world work the way the world works. She said, "A mother does not choose where she lives. She chooses where her children can still become something. I was not going to take that choice from her." Xavier heard the sentence. It went into him the way certain sentences do, not through the ears but through the chest, landing somewhere behind the ribs in a place he did not usually allow things to reach. He did not respond. He stood in the corridor of his own facility in the September heat, and he held the sentence, and he did not know yet what to do with it, but he knew it was going to stay. He drove back across the city that afternoon. Raymond was behind the wheel. The Escalade moved through traffic on the freeway, air conditioning on the interior quiet and cool, and separated from the world outside by tinted glass and leather and the particular insulation of wealth. Xavier did not look at the iPad. He looked out the window. The city moved past him, the same city that had moved past him on the way to the facility that morning, but it was not the same city. It was a city that contained storage units with families inside them. It was a city where an elderly woman had lost her house to a cancer diagnosis and lived next to a wall she knocked on to let a stranger know she was not alone. It had been that city the entire time. He had simply not been looking at it. A memory arrived without asking permission. The way memories do when something in the present has unlocked a door you spent years sealing shut. His mother, Lorraine Drummond, 1979, Houston. She was 26 years old, and she worked 2 jobs, one at a dry cleaner on Alameda Road and one at a diner near the medical center, where she waited tables from 6 in the evening until midnight. She had a son. Xavier was 7. They had lived in an apartment on Wester Street, 2nd floor, 1 bedroom. The rent was $280 a month, which was manageable when she had both jobs and unmanageable when the diner cut her shifts in November because business was slow and they did not need the extra staff. She fell behind in December. She caught up in January. She fell behind again in February. In March, the landlord changed the locks. She had packed what fit into the car, a 1974 Ford Pinto Brown with a dent on the passenger side and a radio that only worked on 1 station. She had driven around for an hour trying to decide what to do. She had stopped in the parking lot behind the Mount Olive Baptist Church on Scott Street. She had sat in the car with her son in the back seat, and she had not cried. He remembered that. He remembered her not crying. He remembered the effort it took for her to not cry, visible in the way her hands gripped the steering wheel. And he had understood, even at 7, that the grip was holding something in place. They had lived in that car for 3 months. She had chosen the church parking lot for a reason. It was 2 blocks from his school. The same logic, the same calculation, 45 years apart. 2 different women, 2 different decades. The same decision. You do not choose where you live. You choose the distance to the place your child needs to be. His mother had woken him every morning in the back seat of the Pinto. She had taken him to the gas station bathroom on the corner to wash his face. She had plugged a small travel iron into the outdoor outlet on the side of the church and pressed his school shirt on the hood of the car. He had gone to school clean. He had gone to school with his shirt ironed and his shoes tied and his homework done on the dashboard by flashlight the night before. No one at school knew. That was by design. She had kept a tin box in the glove compartment. It held cash, their birth certificates, a photograph of Xavier's father, who had left before Xavier was born, and a folded piece of paper with phone numbers she might need in an emergency. The tin box was dented at one corner, and it closed with a clasp that required a specific pressure to snap shut. He had watched her open it every morning and count what was inside, and close it again with that specific pressure and put it back in the glove compartment. The ritual of it. The precision. The way a person handles the only container that holds everything they have left. He sat in the back of the Escalade and he thought about a tin box on the floor of Unit 14B. A Christmas cookie tin, closed, beside a bottle of bleach. He thought about Shirley counting $14 the way his mother had counted whatever was in the glove compartment. He thought about the map a 10-year-old boy had drawn from a storage unit to a school, and he thought about himself at 7 years old walking 2 blocks from a church parking lot to a classroom. And he understood that the distance was the same. The unit of measurement was different. The math was identical. He had built 1,200 storage facilities. He had built an empire out of empty rooms. He had turned square footage into revenue and revenue into wealth, and wealth into the kind of life where you ride in the back of an Escalade and do not look at the iPad because a memory you buried 30 years ago has just climbed out of the ground and is sitting beside you. He had become the kind of man his mother would have had to be afraid of. The man who shows up with a clipboard and a spreadsheet and a plan to sell the building. The man who looks at a unit and sees revenue per square foot. The man who said in this very car on this very morning, every unit that is not generating revenue is a unit that is costing me money. He heard that sentence, now the way you hear something you said, before you understood what it meant. He had spent 30 years building an empire out of empty rooms. He had never asked who was filling them. Xavier picked up his phone. He made 4 calls. The first was to his vice president of operations. He said, "Remove facility 47 from the disposition list. It is not being sold. It is not being converted. Take it off the list." The VP asked why. Xavier said, "Because I said so." He hung up. The second call was to his corporate attorney. He said, "I need you to find out everything about the Houston Housing Authority's rapid rehousing program. Eligibility requirements, application process timeline, from application to placement. I need it today." The attorney said he would have it by 5. Xavier said have it by 3. The third call was to a woman he had met 2 years ago at a fundraiser, a director at Harris County Legal Aid who specialized in domestic violence cases. He told her he needed information about protective orders for a survivor whose existing order was not being enforced. He told her the situation was urgent. He told her he would explain more when they spoke in person. She said she could meet him the following morning. He said that would work. The fourth call was to Jefferson Elementary. He asked to speak with the principal. He told the principal he was interested in the after-school tutoring program for children with learning disabilities. He asked how it was funded. The principal told him it was a Title I grant that covered 3 afternoons a week, but that they had applied for expansion to 5 days and had been denied due to budget constraints. Xavier asked how much the expansion would cost annually. The principal told him. Xavier said, "I will fund it, the full 5 days. You will have the details by the end of the week." He put the phone down. He sat in the back of the car and looked at the city through the window and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, which was the specific weight of a decision that was not about money. He went back to the facility that afternoon. Shirley was on the step. He sat down, the same distance. He told her what he had done. He told her about the housing program and the legal aid contact in the school. He said, "I am not offering you charity. I am offering you a bridge, a 6-month subsidized apartment through a program you qualify for, legal support for your protective order, and your children's stay at Jefferson. I will make sure of that." She listened. Her face did not change. She sat with her hands on her knees, and she looked at him and she processed what he was saying with the specific caution of a person who has been offered things before and has learned that offers have conditions and conditions have costs. And costs are not always visible at the time of acceptance. She said, "What do you get from this?" He looked at her. He thought about his mother in a parking lot pressing a school shirt on the hood of a Pinto. He thought about a tin box in a glove compartment. He thought about a 7-year-old boy walking 2 blocks to school in an ironed shirt, carrying a secret he did not fully understand but kept anyway because his mother told him to. He said, "I get to not be the man my mother would be ashamed of." Shirley looked at him for a long time. Something moved behind her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the recognition that the sentence he had just said was not rehearsed. It had cost him something to say it. She could see the cost. She said, "I will think about it." He said, "Take as long as you need. The unit is yours either way. I am not evicting you." She did not agree that day. She did not agree the following day. 2 weeks passed. During those 2 weeks, she did something Xavier did not know about. She called the Houston Housing Authority herself. She asked about the rapid rehousing program. She asked the eligibility requirements and the application process and the timeline. She asked whether the program was real. The woman on the phone confirmed that it was. Shirley asked whether someone had already started an application on her behalf. The woman said no one had. The program was open. She could apply herself. She did not trust Xavier. She trusted the procedure, and that was enough. That was the correct amount of trust for a woman who had survived what she had survived, and who had learned that trusting people was a luxury, and trusting systems was a calculation, and there was a difference. She called Terrence. She told him she was ready. The morning she moved out of Unit 14B was a Thursday. She packed her things into the same 3 plastic bins she had been living out of for 7 months. Dante School, Amara School, Shirley work. The labels were still on the tape. She did not change them. It took her 20 minutes to pack everything. 20 minutes to disassemble 7 months of a life that had been contained in 150 square feet. The mattress deflated and folded. The cooler emptied and wiped. The LED strips peeled off the wall, leaving small adhesive marks on the concrete that would be there for years. The library book had been returned. Charlotte's Web, due date honored. Even living in a storage unit, she had returned the book on time. She picked up the tin box. She opened it. Inside was $14. The same amount that had been inside it the first morning, the morning we first saw her counting bills in the dark by flashlight. 7 months. She had kept $14 in that box the entire time. She had earned money and spent money and managed money with the kind of precision that would have impressed any accountant, and through all of it, she had maintained $14 in the tin box as a reserve. She had never touched it. $14 was the distance between surviving and not surviving, and she had kept that distance intact for 7 months, the way you keep a wall standing that you cannot afford to let fall. She closed the tin. She put it in the bin marked Shirley Work. She left one thing in the unit, the spray bottle of bleach. She set it in the corner where it had always sat on the floor near where the cooler had been. No one would understand why she left it. She understood. The bleach was not a cleaning product. It was the smell of every morning she had kept this space livable. It was the smell of the effort it took to maintain dignity in a place that was not designed for it. Leaving it was not practical. It was personal. The way some things are. She closed the door for the last time. She stood in the corridor and looked at the metal surface of Unit 14B and did not move for a moment. Then she walked to the gate. Xavier came that afternoon. He stood outside the unit. He did not go in. Terrence rolled the door up for him. The unit was empty. Concrete floor. Metal walls. Nothing inside, except the faint smell of bleach and the adhesive marks on the wall where the lights had been. He looked at the floor. There was a faint sheen on the concrete. Water. She had mopped the floor before she left. There is a specific kind of person who cleans a place they are leaving. Not because anyone will see it, not because it matters to the next tenant or the facility manager or the owner. Because the act of cleaning is the last thing they can control, and control is what they have been holding on to when nothing else held. Shirley had mopped this floor every morning for 7 months. She had mopped it one final time on her way out. The gesture was invisible to anyone who did not understand what it meant. Xavier understood. Terence stood beside him. He said, "She left something for you." Xavier looked. On the concrete ledge beside the door track where the roll-up mechanism connected to the frame, there was a piece of paper, folded into quarters. He picked it up. He unfolded it. It was a map, drawn in pencil by a child's hand. But it was not the same map. This one was new. The starting point was not labeled us. It was labeled home. The ending point was still labeled school. The route was different, longer with different streets and different landmarks, but the dots were there, the safe spots, a bus stop, a park, a library. Dante had drawn a new map, from the apartment to the school, and he had left the old map here. Xavier held both maps. The old one he had been carrying in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks. The new one he had just unfolded. 2 maps, 2 routes. One from a storage unit, one from a home. The same destination, the same careful dots, the same boy. He folded them both. He put them in his pocket. He stood in the empty unit, and he did not move for a long time. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building in Gulfton. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a stove and a refrigerator, a bathroom with a door that locked. Furnished through the program with the basics, a couch, a table, beds. Nothing new, nothing matched. The carpet had a stain near the front door that had been there before they arrived and would be there after they left. It was not a beautiful apartment. It was an apartment. It had windows. Xavier came on the 3rd day. He brought school supplies in a paper bag, notebooks, pencils, a pack of markers, 2 books he had chosen from a list the school librarian had given him, practical things. Things that fit in a backpack. He did not bring anything expensive. He had understood by now that expensive was not the language this family spoke. Useful was. Shirley opened the door. She was wearing a blue shirt. Not a reflective vest, not cargo pants, not steel-toed boots. A blue shirt untucked with the sleeves rolled up. It was the first time he had seen her in clothing that was not a uniform. He noticed this. He did not say anything about it. Some things you notice and hold privately, because saying them out loud would put weight on a moment that is better left light. Amara was in the living room. She was standing by the window. She had been standing by the window for most of the morning, according to Shirley, looking out at the parking lot and the trees and the sky and the other buildings. She turned when Xavier came in, and she looked at him with the open face of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to be cautious about new people. Then she turned back to the window. She said, "Mommy, the room has a window." She said it the way children say things that adults have stopped noticing, with the full weight of discovery, as if the existence of a window in a room was something remarkable. And for a child who had slept for 7 months in a space with no windows, it was. Shirley stood in the kitchen. She did not respond. Her hand moved to the edge of the counter, and her fingers gripped it, and she stood very still, and she did not cry. The not crying was visible in the same way it had been visible in his mother's hands on the steering wheel of the Pinto 45 years ago. The grip that holds something in place. Dante was in the hallway. He had been watching Xavier since he walked in. He had not spoken. He stood with his arms at his sides and his backpack still on, even though he had been home from school for an hour, as if keeping the backpack on meant he could leave quickly if he needed to. He looked at Xavier for a long time. Then he said, "Are you going to take this away too?" The question landed in the room the way certain questions do, not as words, but as a history. Every place Dante had lived in for the past 2 years had been taken away. Every room, every routine, every version of stability. He was 10 years old, and he had already learned that things given could be things removed. And the distance between having and not having was shorter than adults pretended it was. Xavier did not answer immediately. He crouched down so that his eyes were level with Dante's. He did not touch him. He did not reach for him. He simply got low enough that they were looking at each other directly the way you do when you understand that the person you are talking to needs to see your face while you say what you are about to say. He said, "No one is going to take this away." Dante said, "People say that." Xavier said, "I know. I am going to show you instead of saying it." Dante looked at him. He measured the sentence the way his mother measured things carefully against experience. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out the flashlight. The small flashlight that had been the only light source in Unit 14B for 7 months. He walked to the bookshelf in the living room, the one that came with the apartment empty waiting to be filled. He placed the flashlight on the middle shelf. He did not say anything. He just set it there. Shirley saw it. Xavier saw it. Neither of them spoke. The flashlight sat on the shelf the way objects sit when they have been retired from service, still present, no longer needed. Amara came over from the window. She looked at the flashlight on the shelf. She said, "Can I keep it?" Dante said, "You can have it. I do not need it anymore." He said this in the voice of a 10-year-old who had just put down something heavy. 6 months passed. Shirley worked at a medical supply warehouse in Stafford. Day shift, 7 to 3:30. She came home before the children came home from school, which was something that had not been possible before because before there had been no home to come to and no shift that ended in daylight. She was enrolled in a certified nursing assistant program at Houston Community College 2 evenings a week. She had not finished yet. She was not where she wanted to be. She was moving. Dante was in 6th grade. His reading level had reached 4th grade. Miss Waverly, the tutoring specialist at Jefferson, had called Shirley in October to give her an update. She had said, "He reads out loud now. He never used to read out loud. He would only read silently because he was afraid of making mistakes in front of other people. Last week, he read a full page out loud to the class without stopping." Shirley had listened to this on the phone while standing in the kitchen of the apartment. When Miss Waverly finished, Shirley had said, "Thank you," and hung up and turned toward the window and stood there for a while. She did not cry, but she turned toward the window, and that was enough. The tutoring program at Jefferson now ran 5 days a week instead of 3. The expansion had been funded by a private grant administered through a foundation that had not existed 6 months earlier. The foundation was called the Lorraine Drummond Education Fund. Xavier had named it after his mother. He had not told Shirley this. He had not told anyone this except his attorney and his accountant. The name was not public. It did not need to be. Some things you name for the person who made you possible, and the name does its work whether anyone knows it or not. Xavier had changed the company policy. Drummond Storage Holdings now had a partnership with 3 housing nonprofits operating in Houston, Dallas, and Phoenix. The new protocol was simple. When a facility manager identified a tenant who appeared to be living in a unit, the instruction was not to call the police. The instruction was to call a housing navigator, a trained person who knew the systems and the programs and the phone numbers, a person whose job was not enforcement but connection. Several cities across the country were piloting similar models. Xavier had studied them. He had funded 2 of them. He had made the decision, not as philanthropy, but as policy, because policy outlasts philanthropy, and he had learned that the hard way. He spoke at a housing conference in October. He stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom in downtown Houston, and he said to a room full of city planners and nonprofit directors and policy researchers, "A mother does not choose where she lives. She chooses where her children can still become something." An elderly woman in one of my facilities said that to me. Her name is Odessa Grant. She was right and I was wrong about nearly everything. Mrs. Odessa had moved into a senior housing apartment 3 blocks from Shirley. The apartment was small and clean and had a kitchen with a real stove. She still kept her small hot plate in the closet. She did not use it. She said she did not need it anymore. But she did not throw it away. "You do not throw away the things that kept you alive," she said. "You put them somewhere you can see them. So you remember." Outside, Houston went on being Houston. The freeways and the heat and the cranes and the construction and the strip malls and the churches and the storage facilities along the industrial corridors where the city kept its excess, and sometimes without knowing it, its people. A city that held more stories in its storage units than most people would ever know. Shirley Watts was not rescued. She had survived 7 months in a metal box with no windows and 2 children and a tin box with $14 and a system she built herself out of bleach and bus schedules and walking distances and a map drawn by her son. She had survived, and when a door opened, she walked through it. Not because someone carried her, because she had been walking the entire time. Some people are not waiting to be rescued. They are waiting for the door to stop being locked. Xavier Drummond did not become a better man because of Unit 14B. He remembered who he had been before he became the man who looked at the world through spreadsheets. He did not find compassion in a storage unit. He found a memory he had spent 30 years paving over. A brown Pinto in a church parking lot, a tin box in a glove compartment, a mother pressing a school shirt on the hood of a car at 6 in the morning so her son could walk into a classroom looking like he belonged there. Dante still draws maps. He draws them from his bedroom to the library now. The distance is shorter. The lines are straighter. He still marks the safe spots. Old habits. The kind a person keeps not because they need them, but because the person they were when they learned them deserves to be remembered. This story is fictional. But the circumstances are not. Over 7,500 Americans are estimated to be living in storage units at any given time. The real number is almost certainly higher because no one is counting. If this story felt real to you, it is because it is based on patterns that are real. The eviction pipelines, the shelter gaps, the medical debt that turns a homeowner into a renter and a renter into someone with no address. The mothers who calculate distance in school blocks instead of miles. I wrote this story because I believe the way we see people determines what we are willing to do for them. And most of the time we do not see them at all. They are behind roll-up doors. They are in the units we drive past. They are in the numbers on a spreadsheet. I wanted to open one of those doors. Thank you for watching. Before you go, I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were Terrence? He knew, for 7 months. He said nothing. He broke company policy. He let a woman and 2 children stay. Would you have reported her? Or would you have done what he did? Leave a comment and tell me. See you in the next story.